Board, so we will perfect. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our February Talk About It Tuesday. And we are excited. We've taken a little detour from our normal way that we do these, and we are excited to introduce a great partner of Alabama Chambers, someone that many of you already know, but really to dive in a little bit deeper into workers' compensation as well as the fund and to get to know some of our affiliate members so that you can take back their services to your members. And so, with that, I'm going to let our good friend Loren introduce herself. If you don't mind, just before we jump into talking about the fund and all of that, just tell everybody a little bit about you and your background, because you've got a special connection to this group. So,
I
Lauren, welcome.
do. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for asking me to join you all this morning, especially on this cold morning for most of us. So, who is Loren Gibson? I know you all have seen me at the conferences for years now. I've been going representing the Alabama Self-Insured Workers uh, Fund, but I've also been attending previous to that as a Chamber of Commerce executive. But prior to that, I actually managed a fully self-insured workers' compensation program for a large industrial steel manufacturer. And that is how I ended up where I am today. It's where I developed my passion for safety and taking care of employees. And when I went to work for Chambers, it was because I had a passion for helping businesses and especially small businesses. And the position I currently have kind of combines both of those things. I get to work with large and small businesses and I get to help them protect their employees and protect themselves. And that's really what workers' compensation coverage does for employers and employees. It makes sure that employers are protected and employees are protected. I've worked previously for the Huntsville Madison County Chamber of Commerce. I was there for 7 years, and then I moved to Birmingham to work with the Birmingham Business Alliance. And it was there when I asked our fund administrator to come talk to our small businesses about workers' comp. Afterwards, she asked me, "Would you be interested in coming to work for me?" And I was ready to make a change, and that's what landed me here in this position today. And for the last 8 years, I've been going around the state talking to agents, chambers, companies about workers' compensation and safety because the two go hand in hand.
Perfect. And it is just that perfect marriage of representing an industry that you are passionate about and with workers' compensation and safety, as you said, but you understand where our folks are coming from. You've got that chamber background and understanding just the work that these folks do on a daily basis. So you mentioned that you kind of have a passion for workers' compensation. Kind of why? Why is that so important to you that employers are covered and that and they're employ and covering their employees as well? So why workers' compensation and safety?
Well, I'll tell you why. It started when I went to work for the large industrial steel manufacturing company. It was brutal conditions in that facility. They had air condition in the winter and they had heat in the summer. And they were working, some of the work was in front of ovens that put out 2,400 degrees of heat. And when I took over the position, they had over a year's worth of lost time in a year. What that means is they had employees out for more than a year combined in a year. And that's a tremendous amount of injuries in a company. And when I got there, I saw that there were several employees that weren't working with all their fingers, employees who'd been burned, employees who had just some severe injuries. And I understood after talking to them that some of these injuries were caused because they needed extra money at Christmas time, that they needed to be off for a kid's softball game. And they didn't really correlate hurting themselves with hurting themselves. They thought that they were really hurting the company. So I started I did every position, I worked every job in that facility so I get an understanding of it. And I started really implementing programs that made them understand that when they lost a finger, when they got burnt, when they were off work, these were things that were permanently hurting them and their family, and that I cared about that. We also had a hearing protection program, and nobody was wearing their hearing, their hearing protection, because, well, you're not going to tell me what to do. And I had to impart on them, you can fight it. I can terminate you. There are things I can do to make you do it, and or you can't be here. But at the end of the day, if you injure your hearing, you're the one who's not going to be able to hear your grandchildren or your children. It's you're hurting. And I was so passionate about it that by the time I left that organization 5 years later, what had been over a year's worth of lost time was actually down to 5 days. And we managed those injuries, and I think probably the proudest I am of anything I've ever accomplished is the fact that those employees understood after I left that they were responsible for their own safety, and that it took everybody working together, that they were also responsible for their coworkers' safety. And so it's a long answer to a short question, but I just became very passionate about making employees understand how they had control, and making employers understand that they had a responsibility to provide the safest workplace possible for their employees. Because when they didn't, ultimately, they were morally and also financially responsible for injuries for the rest of the life of that injured employee.
Yeah, and great point. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how you think about workers' compensation in those types of setting, industrial manufacturing, but it affects all from office to medical and that sort of thing. But before we jump to that, kind of you had shared when we were talking earlier, you'd shared with me some stats on workers' compensation. So why is it so important?
Well, and this is another reason why I'm passionate about it. I'm looking at um, my notes here because I don't want to get it wrong. This was shocking to me when I read the statistic a few years ago. And so whenever I do a safety talk, I almost always open with it because I hope it shocks all of us. Every 100 minutes in this country, every 100 minutes, an employee dies. Not injured, dies. In Alabama, we have 6 employees that die every month. 6 employees die every month. A lot of those deaths in Alabama are on highways, the
Mm.
workers on highways, and us not paying attention to the speed limit signs, or veering off and not paying attention that they're on the side of the road. 6 employees a month in Alabama die. That's a pretty staggering statistic to me. We worry about the cost of our auto coverage. We worry about the cost of our property coverage. So an average auto claim is 24 to $30,000. The average property claim is $18,000 to a company. The average workers' comp claim to a company is $43,000. So we put a lot of emphasis. Yes, auto insurance is very important, as is property. But we don't understand, and we don't put a lot of emphasis on workers' comp. And that's, if we have an accident, that's where the cost is really going to be incurred. Now, if we just want to look at some other facts, over $176 billion every year is spent on workers' compensation injuries. Imagine where that money could go, where it could be invested in companies if they weren't spending it on workplace injuries. Almost 2.6 million injuries, non-fatal injuries were reported in 2024. The good news is that number was down 3% from the year before. And of those illnesses and injuries, a lot of those were respiratory illnesses, the COVID type of injuries, and those were down 46%. So that's a great statistic. But on average, an employee death, so those 6 deaths per month, cost $1.4 million per death. And for every injury, over $1,000. So those are costs that employers are taking on. And if we could reduce injuries, we reduce costs, we can increase the investment that companies have to spend on other things.
Thank you, Lauren. And I'm going to apologize in advance. They're doing work here in our office that I was unaware of. So if y'all hear construction, that's what it is. So we talk about the big why, and those numbers are staggering. But what are the laws, the requirements around workers' compensation here in Alabama? Who do we have to cover? When does it kick in? When does it apply? That sort of thing.
Well, and this is an interesting one, and I'll tell you why. You don't have to have coverage until you have five or more employees. That doesn't mean you're not liable for those injuries. What it means if you have less than five employees, and I'm looking at a lot of you chambers, that if someone gets hurt on the job, that they're going to sue the company because they are going to get covered one way or the other. You are liable for injuries that happen on the job, whether you have coverage or not. And I think that's important for all of us to note. My father was a small business owner, and I made sure he understood that, you can have it if you've got more than five or you're required to have it, but you need to have it whatever the amount of employees you have. Coverage can be provided in three different ways. You can either cover yourself, and that's typically for larger employees because they have to put out a significant amount of money to guarantee that they can pay for the injuries once they occur. You can go through what we call a standard carrier, someone like Travelers, Chubb, auto owners, they provide workers' compensation. Those are for-profit carriers. Or you can go through a carrier such as us, which is a self-insured group fund. And what that is, it's basically like a co-op. A bunch of employers get together, they take on the risk, and they cover the costs of the injuries. And at the end of the year, if you're part of a fund, most funds, if you've been there 3 years or more, if there's money left over, then that money gets put back towards the employers who contributed to the money that was left over. So that's the difference between a standard carrier and a fund. Funds are not for profit, not to be confused with a C6 or we are regulated by the department, by the state. Thus, we are a nonprofit, but all profits go back to the members after we've paid all of our bills. And
Perfect.
last year, and just to give you an example, last year we gave over $10 million back to employers who were part of our fund. That's a significant amount of money. We had more than a handful that we actually paid to be a part of our fund. So some got as much as $10,000 back and all their coverage paid for.
Wow. You briefly mentioned that you are regulated. Who at the state level regulates work?
Workers' compensation in the state of Alabama is regulated by the Department of Labor's Workers' Compensation Division.
Okay.
That's who regulates it, and that who, if you have a business license, they also I'm not sure how they know this. It's mysterious to me, but they're notified as soon as you have five or more employees, and you will get a letter in the mail from them saying, "Hey, so
Congratulations.
congratulations, you're doing great. By the way, you now need workers' compensation insurance, and if you don't, you're going to be fined." So yeah, they keep track of that and they regulate it and they know.
Yeah, perfect. And I love, and I appreciate you saying that. And it's interesting to me that Alabama is the threshold of five. Most of you know I worked in Georgia for a number of years. The threshold there is two employees. And I think that is to encourage those people to understand, most employers to understand, you're still liable. Even if you don't have it, doesn't mean that, that the injury that takes place is not going to have to be covered somewhere. So,
And two notes that I want to make right there, and thank you for bringing that up. Workers' compensation is state regulated, so
yeah.
the laws in Alabama do not apply to the laws in Florida, and especially important to companies that have they work in Alabama and they have people who work in Florida and they have people who work in Georgia. They have to get coverage that covers each of those states and each of the laws in those states. The other point I want to make is that I think a lot of employers think, well, I only have 4 employees. My group health will cover any injuries. You need to look at your policy because most Blue Cross Blue Shield policies in the state of Alabama specifically carve out workers' comp. So if there's an injury that's happens on the job, they will not cover it. Um, but as an employer, you are still responsible for paying for any medical coverage resulting from that claim.
Perfect. Great point. Thank you. So we talk a lot about workers' compensation and we make assumption we all understand like exactly what that means. What is it? Who does it apply to? And what does it cover? So you mentioned like does it cover an employee traveling? Let's use one of our chambers for as an example. Setting up for an event offsite or what does it cover? What does it not?
So I'm gonna read and then I'll explain. It covers an employee, and it's an injury and personal injury that is only an injury by accident arising out of and in the course of employment and shall not include a disease in any form except for occupational disease or where it results naturally and unavoidably from an accident. Okay. A perfect example of, well, what do they mean by that? COVID. Okay. COVID was not automatically covered. If you worked in an office as an executive assistant or an executive director and you got COVID, it was not automatically covered because your job didn't entail you seeing people all the time that had COVID. If you were a nurse and you worked in the COVID unit, then it was covered if you got COVID. If you'd been working, now, if you'd been off for 2 weeks and with your family and you got COVID, then it wasn't covered. So, disease is it's one of those, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. An injury does not include an injury caused by the act of a third person or a fellow employee intended to injure the employee because of reasons personal to him or her. So if someone, and unfortunately this happens, enters the workplace with a gun and kills or maims someone because they're mad at them, that is not considered a workplace injury. If 2 employees are goofing around wrestling and they get hurt, and this happened to me, that is not covered because they were goofing around, they weren't doing their job. Also, something that's not covered is mental injury. So, let's say you have a very stressful job and you have to seek therapy because it is very stressful. That is not covered. What is covered is if you have an injury that then causes you mental distress that may or may not be covered. So I think that's an important distinction. Now you ask the question, hey, and we all do this, right? We're either on site or off site. We're moving things, we're picking things up, and you strain your back, and back strains are the number one cause of injuries. That's covered, whether you're in the office or whether you're at the event site. What's also covered is if you're driving to that site and you have a car accident, that is it may be covered by the other driver, but it is also a workers' compensation injury because you were driving in the course of your position. Now, if you were working and you were setting up an event and you went to lunch and you had a car wreck, that is not covered. So you have to be traveling in the course of your job for that to be covered.
So Lauren, and you made the very firm distinction that it is employees that are covered. And I know this has been a question that someone has had. Independent contractors, so 1099 employees, are they covered or not?
So that is a great question, and it really depends on your policy. 1099, I'll use the construction industry. The construction industry has a lot of subcontractors that may or may not have their own coverage. You want to make sure that when you're doing an audit, you claim those hours, those subcontractor hours, so that they will be covered by your policy. And the reason for that is if they're not covered, they're going to get their money some way, somehow, and they'll end up suing up the line. And if you're the last person up at the line or the last company up at the line, you can be sued. So 1099 contractors are the same. They can be covered. It really depends on your carrier and what you claim, but you can include those because when you're getting workers' compensation coverage, they're going to ask you for all the different codes, the work codes that you have for the employees, and the hours that you are assuming that they're going to have because workers' compensation covered is based on $100 of payroll. So you want to make sure you do claim them. But yes, they can be covered if they don't have their own coverage. A lot of contractors do require that their subcontractors have workers' compensation.
So, can you also address, because with our chambers, a lot, we work with volunteers a lot, our board of directors, volunteers, ambassadors that are setting up, they're working within the work confines of the chamber. Are they or are they not covered?
They are not covered.
Okay.
Volunteers are not covered. And I'll give a great example. We just we cover a lot of nonprofits, one of whom is Habitat for Humanity up in Huntsville, Alabama. And that was a question he had. You know, we use a lot of volunteers. Are they covered by workers' comp? And they're not. Volunteers are volunteering their hours, so they are not. Now, interestingly enough, if a volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, for example, is volunteering on behalf of their company. So their company has adopted a home and said, hey, we need employees to go work on the home. They could have recourse on the employer that sent them to the job as a volunteer. So sometimes volunteers are voluntold, and if you're voluntold, then you're an employee of somebody.
Okay, good. Great distinctions, and I appreciate that. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit, we talked a lot about workers' comp and great knowledge for our executives and chamber professionals to have, but also to impart on their small businesses and members as they are working with them. So, let's talk about the fund, Alabama Self-Insured Workers' Compensation Fund.
It's a mouthful.
Why choose a self-insured group over a commercial carrier? And more specifically, why should we work with you?
So I will tell you, again, based on my experience, when I took over at the industrial manufacturing company that I did, we did have an insurance carrier that was managing our claims. And they were basically just writing checks. They just wanted hey, and that's why employees kept getting hurt. They knew if they hurt their finger, they'd get $10,000. If they hurt a shoulder, they'd get $20,000. When I came in, I said, we're not going to do that. We're going to manage the claims. I want the employees to get the best care possible. But I also want to make sure that we're protected, that employees are coming back to work, that they're not malingering, and that we're not spending more than we have to. So standard carriers don't tend to have the resources to manage claims as effectively as self-insured group funds because we're motivated to do that because every dime we save the employer goes back to our employers. So that's important to us. So that's one reason. The other is that we do take a very personal interest in managing claims and getting employees back to work. And really the key in keeping the cost of claims down is getting employees who are out back to work because the longer they're out, the more comfortable they become in being out. And quite frankly, the more law commercials they see from Shannara and Morgan and Morgan, and because they deliberately run those commercials from 10 to 2 when people are watching TV. So we want to get them back to work and basically get them back to feeling useful and worthwhile. And so that they really are healed from their injuries a lot quicker. And self-insured group funds tend to do that very well. We have an outstanding relationship with a lot of the providers in our state. I also want to say the difference between workers' comp and group health. This is a very important distinction. If your employee gets hurt at home, playing softball, it's not work related, they can go to whatever doctor they want. They can go to their cousin's best friend. They can do that. With workers' comp, when they're injured at work, the employer, or in this case, the insurance carrier, whether that's a fund or a carrier, directs the care. We get to tell them which doctor they're going to go to. So it's really important to have a good relationship with those doctors so that it facilitates communication so the employee can get the best care, but also that we can make sure that they're able to return to work as quick as possible. So that's another distinction that I think group funds offer, as well as just the fact that we're not in business to make money for ourselves. We're in business to protect employers and employees. The fund has been around for 45 years, more than 45 years. In fact, we're coming up on 50. And I'll give you just a real short history break. There were several funds that were started. There were three funds. We were not the first one. Workers First and AGC were two of the first, and then we came along, and we were all kind of small, but something strange happened. In around early 1990, the New York Times called Alabama tort hell. Tort hell, and every single standard carrier left the state. Not one, not two, every single one of them. What that meant was companies were left with only one resource, and that was assigned risk. And if you've ever had a teenager that had to go on assigned risk for their car insurance, you understand how cost prohibitive that was for especially our smaller employers. So the state got together with the three funds and said, hey, we need to work out a solution here. So all three of the funds worked with the state, tightened the regulations around funds so you couldn't have fly-by-night funds taking money but not providing any coverage. And then we went out and we covered every employer that we possibly could, which is why in the state of Alabama, funds are so strong and the regulations regarding them are so strong. We have the strongest funds in the country. And when I have agents who are in other states, take over a company's account that's in our state, they go, I don't understand why funds are so strong. And I give them that short background. After we went through tort reform and we became more business friendly, the standard carriers moved back into the state. However, the trust they had with the employers, it's taken a long time for that to rebuild. And at one time, we had almost 90% of the business. Now it's about 50-50 between carriers and funds. But we have been around since the very beginning, and we intend to be around for another 50 years. And we're very proud of what we have done for the state. We work very closely with the state. Mercedes is one of the companies that we have covered since their inception. We have high deductible accounts, and we cover, Misty's hair salon in Tuscaloosa. So we go from small to large employers, but really we're working for the best of all employers in the state.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for that history. I've always kind of wondered, like, how funds became so strong here in Alabama. So we're gonna spend the last few minutes. Can you just talk about specifically how our chambers can work with you, what that looks like? I know you all offer an affinity program that they can take part in, but then also just how you personally and the fund can be a resource for our local chambers.
Well, okay, I'll start off. Let me start off with the affinity program. We have a very strong affinity program with both ABC of Central Alabama and below, and then North Alabama ABC. And what that entails is basically if one of their members who's an agent signs up a member with us, then the ABC gets 2% of the total cost of the coverage. Okay. We would love to do that with any chamber that wants to look into that program. I would love to answer your questions and give you more specifics about it, but we do have a very strong affinity program and very proud of that. The other thing, what was the second part of that question? I'm sorry.
Oh, just how you
Oh,
personally can be a resource, and then you're a great presenter, and how you can be a resource to the local chambers.
thank you. I am passionate about safety, and I am passionate about helping our members tell their employees why safety matters. And so, one of the things that I have done and absolutely enjoy doing is I go around the state talking to employers and their employees about safety. I talk to them about the statistics, and then I tell them my experiences and why it is important that they be in charge of their own personal safety, that they take charge of that, and why they take charge of the safety of the employees working around them. So we call it the Loren and Steve show. We go on the road. I talk about, I talk about workers' comp, and I talk about safety statistics. And then we have Steve, who also talks about how employers can control the costs of workers' comp, what they are in control of, because workers' compensation is one of those things that an employer has so much more control than what they realize. We have videos, we have safety talks. We actually also have an app that supervisors can use to give safety talks. We have a lot of resources that we're willing to share. If you all need speakers at any of your events, we don't charge. Maybe lunch. Heather has used me on several occasions, but I do love just going and just sharing my passion and sharing my experience with employers and with chambers, because I think with all of us working together, we really can make a difference.
That's awesome, Lauren, and thank you. So if anybody has any questions for Lauren, I'm gonna Brenda had put in the chat, do you have any kind of graphic that can be shared in like member newsletters about the fund or safety, anything graphically that we can share with our chamber so they can share with their members?
Absolutely. I have a lot of different things that I can share, a lot of graphics. I've got this PowerPoint that we can share. So you tell me what you're looking for, and we can make sure that we can provide that to you.
Perfect. And as always, we will follow up with the recording of this. Lauren's contact information, many of you already have that, but the best way to get in touch with Lauren. And then also the PowerPoint, I think we can share. It's got some great information as well. So um, any
If
final, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I can leave with just one final thought, and while I would love the opportunity to help each of your members, I really want to make sure that I impart upon you, whether you have two employees as a Chamber of Commerce or whether you have 40 employees as a Chamber of Commerce. Make sure your workspaces are safe. Make sure you're protecting your employees. Some of the worst accidents we've had, the most costly accidents we've had, have been in an office environment, and we don't think about that. Why? One of our worst was because of heels, high heels in a hallway, got caught in a crack. So I know most of our chambers here are small and think, well, this doesn't apply to me, but it does. It does apply to you. So just kind of look at your workspaces and see what could you do different. How could you be safer? And again, please use me as a resource. I've got other resources that we could send to help do a safety audit and help y'all be safer.
And thank you. And Lauren, I'm glad you said that because as someone who used to in a previous life wear those higher heels. Carla's laughing because she knows it has happened to me.
To
Um,
be fair, you weren't wearing the heels, you were wearing wedges.
I was wearing wedges that day, but still, it was a broken foot. Um, just because, yeah, I wasn't being safe.
Stairs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
stairs.
one other point I want to make, because this is since COVID really happened a lot. If an employee is injured at home while they're working for you, you're liable for that injury. So, and we're not paying attention to the workspaces at home, the cords that we have running because we're working from our kitchen or, wherever. So just, keep top of mind, just because you're working at home doesn't mean that you're safe from work-related injuries.
Look, I thank you for saying that. I'd not even thought
Mhm.
about the remote work aspect of it as well. So, hey, Carla, we're going to do an
Listen, I will
audit.
just, this is what, there was many a time when she and I worked together in person that she would walk into the office. She goes, I don't want to know what you're doing, but it better not cause me paperwork.
That's right. Don't
And
make
that
me
is the
have
other
to do
aspect.
paperwork.
For no other reason you don't want to claim because of all the paperwork you have to fill out.
Exactly. Exactly. Just don't make me have to do paperwork.
Right.
Does anyone have any thoughts or questions for Lauren? I hope that this has been beneficial. It has been for me, and hopefully for each of you. So, does anyone have any questions, thoughts? All right, you're all experts now. I think the biggest takeaway is just be a resource for your members, especially your smaller members who think just because the law says this, that the law says five, so that's the threshold, but it can affect and does affect at all levels. Um, and then again, I will say to Lauren, thank you for your support and for the fund support of Alabama Chambers and all that you do. For the last several years, the fund has been the presenting sponsor for our professional development conference in October, and they're going to be again this year. And that just shows that they are truly committed to helping you all specifically and helping the businesses, the over 40,000 businesses that our chambers across the state collectively represent. So, um, Lauren, just I don't know if you've monitored the chat, but Maddie in Op just says her camera and mic won't work, but thank you. It was so helpful, and I will echo that. So, with that. Lauren, again, thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you. It is always a pleasure to talk with your group.
Yeah. And so thank you so much. We will follow up with the resources. Most of you know how to get in touch with Lauren, and of course, you know how to get in touch with Carla or I. So with that, I will end by saying two things. One, capital update will take place this Friday at 10 a.m. Hope that you will sign on and take part in that briefing as well. Registration is now open for our Executive Leadership Conference to be hosted at the Huntsville-Madison County Chamber. And I think you're going to see some really nice coffee set up again, um, courtesy of our friends at the fund. We appreciate that. We're all about some coffee around here, and we love that. But hope that you all will register. We're going to be announcing our keynote this week, I think. Carla, is it this week? Yeah.
In news and notes.
And news and notes next week.
Yes.
So with that, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day. Lauren, thank you again for your time, and we will see you all on the road. Thanks, guys. Have a great
Y'all
day.
have a great day.